I approached Alan Lim and Scratch and said, I've been trying all these things in training and nothing seems to work, and can we create something maybe that would work?
So 2 years ago, we started working with Gwen Jorgensen. Our philosophy at Scratch Labs is that we solve problems for athletes. And one of the problems she had was fueling for the marathon and fueling for her hardest workouts. So we started working together to figure out a convenient way for her to get all of the calories and hydration she needed without getting the GI distress that really plagues so many athletes.
Alan Lim came out to Portland and kind of just observed my training environment. I love partnering with brands who are all about the athletes, and that's something that Scratch has really taken to another level.
So what I realized through this was that we needed a way to give Gwen at least 100 grams of carbohydrate right at the start line, and maybe an additional 50, maybe at most 100 grams of carbohydrate over the next 2 hours. We also knew that the only way that we could do that was with some sort of liquid fuel, because she wouldn't be able to eat and manage that.
When I started training for the marathon, I knew that I needed to focus on my fueling, and I felt like there was no product out there that tasted good to me, that didn't upset my stomach, that had enough calories that I needed for the marathon.
She goes so hard that she barely has enough time to take a drink of water or to even breathe enough to be able to swallow. So I realized at that point that the solution wasn't just going to happen with us developing a new product for her while she was on the run. We had to develop a whole new strategy, a whole new way to approach fueling during those super hard and long workouts.
I think the coolest part that I really enjoyed was Alan came back like a month or two later, and he had like 8 different flavors of this new product that he created. And I sat there at the dining table with Pat, and we just went through and we taste tested everything. And Alan actually included some competitors' products within this, which I thought was super interesting, and just showed that he really cared about the athlete, and it wasn't just about his brand. He really wanted to find something that would work for me.
The problem with liquid fuel, though, is that can cause a lot of GI distress. So we started looking for a really, really complex carbohydrate that had a moderate to slow digestion rate. Once I kind of identified what the problem was and what the potential solution was, it still took a lot of time to actually source and find the right type of carbohydrate. That was reading the literature, that was meeting with different vendors, that was talking to other scientists. Once we actually identified the different types of carbohydrates, then it was making formulas, sending them back to Gwen, figuring out, what was happening with viscosity, what was happening with taste, did it work, did it not work, re-simulating things.
We went out and we did some testing. Alan came back for a long run where I tested it out, and I could really feel the difference and notice that my body wasn't breaking down as much because I was able to get those carbs in, and I didn't have any GI issues, which was probably the biggest win for me.
Ultimately, what we ended up creating was a product called Superfuel that is based on a carbohydrate called highly branched cyclic dextrin or clustered dextrin. This is a not only very long chain polymer with about 60 to 7 glucose units, but it's super branched and it's wound up like a wreath, which makes it almost the same structure as real food, except that it's really soluble and can go into liquid form. So it's ultimately for any athlete who needs a lot of calories but doesn't have time to actually stop and chew food. After figuring out what type of carbohydrate to use, we also realized there was an opportunity to not ignore the hydration part of the equation. And so we added the same amount of sodium as is in our regular sports drink. For 500 mils, that's 400 milligrams of sodium, which is equal to the amount of salt that you lose in your sweat. So while this is a product designed for fueling on your hardest and longest days, it's also a product that will provide you the same amount of hydration and electrolyte for 500 mils of fluid as our sports drink would. All told, it took us 2 years before we actually had something that we were super excited about, super proud of, that was actually solving the problem. And then we began testing that with other athletes in other applications, seeing what else we could solve with that new formula.
I will probably never go back to not using Superfuel on my long runs now. It's a way for me that I can get in the carbs, stay hydrated throughout my runs, and I've just noticed I feel just so much better when I stop my run. I feel so much better throughout the day, the next day when I've actually stayed up on my hydration. So my long run days are a day that's not necessarily a workout, but I still have the hyperhydration before, I have the super fuel during, which really helps me in my recovery. And then the rest of the day, I just enjoy eating real foods to make sure that I'm recovering and can maximize my training.
What was really amazing was that it started out with the marathon, but we ended up creating a liquid carbohydrate that had so much flexibility because of its slower digestion rate and because of its very low concentration due to its big weight, that we effectively found a way of creating liquid fuel. It solved a lot of problems, not just the ones for Gwen. Ultimately, we still recommend that food is still a great option for fueling yourself. But if you're in a situation where you're running through the forest, or you're running in the middle of a marathon, or you're in the middle of a really hard track workout and eating real food isn't possible, then this is a phenomenal alternative.